Hello everyone, welcome to this webcast on safe sleeping. I'm Daksha Mistry and I'm the Learning and Development Manager for Kingston and Richmond Safeguarding Children's Partnership. In this webcast, we've got a range of practitioners who are going to talk about risks and vulnerabilities around babies and sleeping habits and how we can support parents with safe sleeping. I'm just going to ask everyone in the room to introduce themselves before we get going on our discussions. Can I start with Sarah Bennett, please?
Good afternoon, I'm Sarah Bennett. I'm a coordinator for Kingston and Richmond Safeguarding Children Partnership and I lead on child death reviews. So I'm bringing learning from deaths from SUDI or SIDS related deaths over the years to share with practitioners here to help understand how we can better support families to use the advice around safer sleep.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah Green?
Hi, I'm Sarah Green, Consultant Midwife for Public Health and Safeguarding at Chelsea and Westminster NHS Trust.
Thank you. Janet?
Hi, I'm Janet Deboo. I'm Senior Coordinator with Home Start, working in Richmond, Kingston and Hounslow.
Thank you. Catherine?
Hi there, I'm Catherine Johnson. I'm one of the health visitors in the Richmond Borough, more specifically I work in Twickenham and Whitton.
Thank you. Rupinder?
Hi, I'm Rupinder Kaur, Specialist Health Visitor and High Impact Area Lead for Accident Prevention under 5s in Wandsworth and Richmond.
Thank you. Stella?
Hello, I'm Stella Parkin. I'm the Professional Development Lead for the Lullaby Trust and also a Health Visitor by profession.
Thank you, Stella. And Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate Taylor. I'm the Infant Feeding Lead for Richmond and Wandsworth Borough.
Thank you, Kate. So what we're going to do now is just flash up a few statements, questions, things that we often are hearing said about safe sleeping or sleeping habits for babies and have some discussions around each one. So if we can have the first statement, please. So the first statement is, I'm pregnant and busy buying things I'll need for the baby. I've heard sleep nests really help babies settle, so I'm planning to get one of these. Stella, I think you were going to start off the discussion on this one.
Yes, thank you. So they're becoming really popular, aren't they, nests and pods, and it seems that quite a lot of parents are deciding to buy them or be given them as gifts antenatally. But the cause for concern around them is around the soft, kind of raised or cushioned areas that you often have on pods and nests, which can cause potential overheating in that baby or obstruct the baby's breathing if the baby rolls over and gets trapped against the side of these soft or raised surfaces. We also know that if the babies do roll and end up on their side, then side sleeping is also a risk factor for SIDS. It also makes it very difficult to tuck in bedding on a pod or a nest, and then it can make it more easy for bedding to go over the head of the baby, and we know that the head is an important source of heat loss. Also importantly, there's no British standard for a pod or a nest, unlike for a mattress. And then the other risk is that that baby gets warm and snuggly in that sleep nest and may sleep more deeply as a consequence. And then there can be a decreased arousal from sleep, which we also know is associated with SIDS.
Thank you, Stella. Sarah Green.
And I think, yeah, I agree. And I think it's about having those conversations quite early, maybe, or sometime during the pregnancy before they've gone out and bought those things. And I think people might use those nests because perhaps they're the cheaper option. And they think that that's a bit more convenient. They can be taken all over the place potentially. So it's really about having those conversations when somebody's pregnant and making sure that they know that they're not advised.
Thank you, Sarah. Kate?
Yes, just to concur with what Sarah and Stella have said, but it's having a wider conversation about sleep. Is it a worry, a particular factor in pregnancy? Are the parents looking to find solutions to getting their baby to sleep after the birth, and and finding having a discussion about what normal sleep patterns we would see in a baby. So good preparation, and if they're having struggles with sleeping themselves in pregnancy, to give them support with that, because we know that will help also postnatally to help with sleep.
I was just going to follow on from Sarah saying about having all these conversations antenatally and making parents, especially first-time parents, sort of realise how little babies sleep and making it a realistic expectation of how often the baby's going to sleep, and maybe discouraging them from thinking the baby will settle very easily if they have all these different props and different equipment. Actually, it's normal and something that we want for babies to wake, and it'd be more worrying if they weren't rousing and weren't waking.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the underlying message is about having the conversations, having them early, and normalising the fact that actually babies should be waking up during the night. Okay, thanks for that. Shall we move on to the next one? So this one says, to give me a break, my partner takes baby to the sofa and falls asleep with the baby lying on his chest. Sarah Green, you were going to kick off with this one.
Yeah, and I think it's about having those conversations both antenatally and again postnatally. And I think whilst it's really important to have those conversations antenatally, I think sometimes it needs to be repeated. Well, it always needs to be repeated, because I think parents sometimes can just kind of get this labour block, so they can't really take in a lot around safe sleeping until they've had the baby potentially. So I think it's a really good idea to bring it up to both parents in the antenatal period, whenever, if providing they're both together, and then again having that conversation before they go home, because that is a really unsafe thing to do, and they really do need to make sure that they're aware of that.
Thanks. Stella?
Yes, just following on from what Sarah said about how unsafe it is for a baby, it actually increases the risk of SIDS by 50 times, having a baby sofa sharing with an adult who is asleep, or sleeping on an armchair with a sleeping adult. And if we think about the sort of reasons why, that baby is almost certainly going to be sleeping on its front, sleeping prone, not on its back. That adult is never going to be firm and flat like a cot mattress would be. There's the risk of overheating the baby. And then in addition to those things, there's these other safety concerns. So around entrapment of the baby or overlaying onto the baby, potentially the baby suffocating or falling onto the floor. So in that antenatal period and postnatal period, it's thinking about solutions. What can a parent or carer, whoever is looking after the baby, do that could potentially help them not to actually co-sleep on a sofa? So things like having the Moses basket or a travel cot or a carry cot or something similar by the side of that sofa, so that if the adult starts to feel drowsy themselves, they can then hopefully pop the baby into their separate, safer sleep space. Or if there's another adult around, that adult can take the baby, from the parent or adult then who is becoming drowsy, and including dads and partners and anybody else that might be looking after that baby, so that they know how risky this co-sleeping practice is for a baby.
Thanks, Stella. Catherine?
I think Stella just sort of said what I was going to say just at the end of her little bit on this, but I just think this really highlights the importance of making sure the partners are present during these big sort of safety talks and things. I mean, I say big, but during the new birth visit, like I was saying earlier, that sometimes partners they think it's more a mum and baby discussion, and actually it's really important to have them there at these moments when they're having important information given. Thank you. Kate?
Just to say that having a discussion about sleep deprivation and what the whole family is experiencing at any one time when we have contact with them is really important, because that's is the driver behind sometimes these practices, which are very, very risky.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the message very much is about anybody who is in the home with the baby, potentially caring for the baby, is given this sort of information and is aware of the risks. Okay, thank you for that. Maybe we can move on to the next one, please. So this one says, my 3-week-old will only sleep when I put her down on her stomach. If she feels comfortable enough to fall asleep, it must be okay. Stella was going to start with this one.
So it can be very tempting, can't it, for a parent, if their baby is falling asleep quite happily on their front, to think that that is okay for that baby. But we know that the risk of SIDS is 6 times higher in babies that are sleeping on their front compared to babies that are sleeping on their back. And some of those risks are around the fact that that baby can overheat while it's laying on its tummy. It can easily get covers, loose bedding over that baby's head, so overheat in that way, and also potentially obstruct the baby's breathing. We know that the simple action of turning babies onto their back in the Back to Sleep campaign back in 1991 has meant that the rate of SIDS has fallen by 79%. So just that simple thing of turning babies over and sleeping on their back. There are also the other safety concerns around potentially that baby choking or inhaling their own vomit. And some of the potential mechanisms around SIDS involved here is potentially around abnormalities or immaturity of autonomic control in that baby, and therefore decreased arousal from sleep. So we find that babies sleeping on their fronts often do sleep more heavily and more deeply, and the risk is that they won't arouse so easily from sleep.
Thank you, Stella. Kate?
Yes, just to explore with the parents why exactly they want to use that particular practice. Is it something they heard from their grandmothers or someone else has advised them to do that? Or is there a medical reason or potential medical reason behind wanting to do that? So again, one just needs to explore what is driving that issue to help get to the bottom of it, and to obviously open up the dialogue to talk about those risks.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to comment on that one? I think following on from what Kate was saying, I think if babies are born very prematurely, sometimes parents might see their babies being slept in that position in hospitals. Maybe that's something they may be thinking to replicate at home. So it's really clear about being clear with them about what's the safest thing to do at home. Okay, thank you. The next slide, please. So this one says, my mother-in-law is from India and lives with me. She insists that my baby should be sleeping in the bed with us and not in a cot. Janet was going to start this one.
Yes, I think with any situation, but perhaps particularly with a situation like this, it's worth taking the time not just to give the advice and the recommendations and the reasons why you're giving that advice, but to really spend time hearing from mum what her situation is and how she might apply that advice. And certainly a mum here would be under a lot of pressure, both culturally and from the extended family. And you've really got to feel confident you've empowered that mum to take the advice on board and use it in a way that works for her and her particular situation. It's not easy for her.
Thanks, Janet. Sarah?
Yeah, I agree. And I think with my safeguarding hat on, I think it's also really important, because she's clearly saying that she's insisted to see the new mother on her own, without her mother-in-law, without her partner, just to kind of explore and make sure there's not any bigger issues around kind of coercive control, etc., which sometimes can happen when all families are living together. So it's exploring that, and then making sure that she's empowered, perhaps with her mother-in-law, if there aren't any issues, to and make sure that we're reinforcing that message to the mother-in-law as well, so that she's empowered to be able to do that.
Thank you. Stella?
Yeah, so staying on that theme of empowerment also is, giving the information around, when it's higher risk to bed share, because we know that on any given night, there are over a third of parents who say that they regularly bed share, and 25% of parents who say that they sometimes do. And that could be intentionally or unintentionally. So it's empowering that mum with knowledge around her individual baby and when the higher risk situations are. So those are if either parent smokes, or if either parent, whether or not they're smoking in the bedroom or not, that's irrespective of that. If either parent take drugs, use alcohol or prescription medications or medications bought over the counter that might make them drowsy, or if their baby was premature before 37 weeks, or a low birth weight baby, 2.5 kilograms or 5.5 pounds, then there is a higher risk of bringing that baby into bed on those occasions. So then it is thinking about, what things could they do to make that a safer place for that baby to sleep. It's never going to be safe, but how could they minimize the risk? So thinking about putting that baby to sleep on its back in the bed, thinking about what to do with parent-adult bedding, so keeping pillows away, that kind of thing from the baby, so the baby doesn't overheat or doesn't obstruct their breathing, not letting pets or other children in the bed, making sure the baby can't fall out, not get trapped against the bed, between the bed and the wall, and not leaving that baby alone in the bed day or night, so that they've got that knowledge that they then perhaps can talk to their mother-in-law about as well.
Thank you. Kate?
Yes, no, just following on from Stella, it's so important that they understand all the risk factors and they can mitigate those and make it as safe as possible if that's their intention or that's what they feel they need to do, because culturally that's something that's familiar to them as a family, but it's opening up that discussion so that they're fully informed, they know the evidence, they understand the research behind what we're saying.
Thank you. And Sarah, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, just for sorry, I would just so I think about making sure that if they don't speak English, that we are making sure that we're using translators or materials by the Lullaby Trust that makes that very, very clear in whatever language they're speaking, because otherwise they're just going to miss that completely. So that is really vitally important, not just for this statement, but for every single case when we're talking about prevention of cot death. Thank you. Yeah, Stella?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on some of those materials that Sarah mentioned. So we have an easy read card that is available in lots of different languages, I think up to 15 languages, that could be used with families where English isn't their first language. We also have a new speak-free and text-free animation on the website that's free to view, which can help in situations, again, where English might not be the first language, but also perhaps if one or more of the parents have a learning disability, for example. So there are a range of different tools and resources on the website that might help practitioners and professionals talk to families about safer sleep.
Thank you. Yeah, I think some really important points, and also for practitioners to feel confident about talking about cultural beliefs and practices, and to be able to help the mum in this situation to have the discussions and make the choices that she feels right, informed with research, and the most safest practices. Sarah Bennett, did you want to come in here?
I just thought it might be helpful to hear from Stella as well, briefly thinking about relating advice to different families, different situations, that the Lullaby Trust also has a resource for young parents, Little Lullaby. So again, sort of tailoring advice. We know that young parents might be vulnerable, and care leaver parents can be vulnerable. So professionals being aware that there's different resources geared at different audience groups is kind of helpful, and that they can share what might be most effective for that young person, for example.
Yes, so Little Lullaby is designed for parents under 25 in mind. So they have their own separate website, and there's lots of information on there around SIDS and safer sleep, but just general information about caring for a baby. And there are vlogs. I had to ask what a vlog was. Apparently it's a video blog, and blogs, and the young parents who take part in moderating the website are part of a young parent panel, and they will also, for example, take over the Lullaby Trust social media for a week, and they'll post things on social media. So it's a way of young people engaging with information perhaps in a different way, because that information is coming from other young people. So it's perhaps in those instances it might be beneficial, you know, for some families where parents are under the age of 25.
Thank you. Kate.
Just wanted to add, this is particularly relevant to how the baby's being fed, in terms of the driver behind the co-sleeping. So a sort of understanding of how the actual baby's being fed is going to be very important to the advice that you then subsequently give.
Thank you, Kate. Right, should we move on to the next one, please? So this one says, there isn't a cot at my mum's, so when we are there, I put the baby in the middle of the bed and surround her with pillows. Rupinder, you were going to start off with this one.
Yeah, so in this scenario, suppose it would be explaining and reminding parents that wherever baby is sleeping, whether that's at night or during the day, napping, that the advice remains the same and that this should always comply with the safe sleeping guidelines, and that the scenario displayed is not recommended. And also just offering preemptive advice. So perhaps use of a checklist, advising a travel cot for when parents are going away. I think it's important, and I think as a professional, we need to be aware of this, especially with lockdown measures being lifted. This is a scenario that we might be seeing potentially more frequently going forward. So it's just having those conversations with parents and making them aware that they do need to be prepared in order to protect their baby.
Thank you. Sarah.
I think, yeah, I agree. And I think when the national review into SIDS between 18 and 19, I think that was one of the big reasons, one of the biggest kind of contributory factors, that people were going away to a different place and they hadn't thought about where their baby was going to sleep. So I think it's really important, because a lot of mums or parents might go to a relative's for a few weeks after they've had a baby. So I think, and that happens quite often, so I think it's really important to have those conversations and make sure that that baby is safe to go to sleep somewhere, wherever they are going, and what they're going to use.
Thank you. And Stella.
Yes, I agree, and I think that also extends to the fact that we're coming out of COVID restrictions now. Families might be starting to book holidays again, going to stay in various different types of accommodation, self-catering, etc. Have they thought about what their baby is going to sleep in? But I think this scenario could also happen in people's own homes as well. We have an increase in home working as a result of COVID. And it might mean that actually the baby is put down to sleep somewhere different that day, because actually somebody needs to use their room to make a phone call or have a virtual meeting. And so actually the baby is put down somewhere unsafe to sleep on that occasion. And it could only take one occasion. And the risk here is that the baby could get trapped against the pillows, could overheat, could have problems with breathing as a result. If the baby is starting to roll, it could roll and get wedged on its side. And then of course it could be crawling, and that baby could then end up crawling off the bed and falling on the floor. So it's thinking about having kind of portable sleeping spaces like Moses baskets and travel cots and carry cots, or even prams that lay completely flat. That baby could be put in and put somewhere safe to sleep.
Thank you. Okay, should we move on to the next one, please? So this one says, is it more risky to co-sleep with a baby that's newborn is it more risky to co-sleep with a newborn baby that's been born prematurely? And Stella was going to start with that one.
The short answer is yes, it is. We know that prematurity is associated with a higher SIDS risk, and many premature babies are also of a lower birth weight, And we know that low birth weight babies are at 5 times more risk of SIDS than babies born with a normal average rate. And thinking about the advice for premature babies, safer sleep advice is up to 1 year old. And for premature babies, that's adjusted to their 1 year from their due date, not 1 year from their birth date. On the Lullaby Trust website, we have a really good booklet, leaflet called Premature Babies and Low Birth Weight Babies, which gives lots of information about when a baby is discharged home, what to think about, because many babies might be slept in different positions or with hats on, for example, if they are in special care baby units or neonatal units, and what to do when bringing that baby home. So it's important that that baby isn't overheated and that the room temperature is ideally kept between 16 to 20 degrees. Having a room thermometer can really be helpful to judge temperature, because most of us are actually quite poor judges of what the temperature is in a room. And remembering that the temperature is different in different rooms within a home or in an environment. So we advise perhaps having, a small thermometer that could go in the changing bag. So wherever baby goes, changing bag tends to go too. So if mum's out and about, if she's going, meeting friends, going into another environment, especially as restrictions are now being lifted and we can probably be going in cafes and things, it's making sure that mum knows, how hot that environment is, and then adjusting clothing accordingly, taking off, outer clothing and hats so that the baby doesn't overheat.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to say anything more on that one? Okay, so shall we move on to the final slide? I think Sarah, you were going to talk to this one.
Yeah, so this slide is from the National Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel's analysis of serious incidents that were referred to them relating to SIDS and SUDIs, and this slide gives you a sort of breakdown of risk factors for SIDS and SUDI that they found amongst the cases referred. They reviewed 40 cases in total, and this shows you the proportion that had these issues present. We as a partnership have a SUDI task and finish group to look at both our own local data and the learning from the national reviews findings to ensure that we're targeting safer sleep advice effectively. And I think key things that I would highlight from our local analysis so far is that quite a high proportion of parents are repeat parents, so they're not parents that are receiving the safer sleep advice for the first time. So again, it's that issue around being receptive and responsive to families' individual experiences, perhaps with their previous children, and thinking about how the advice may have evolved and helping them to hear it afresh and think about their individual circumstances and their individual baby and any risk factors that may be present. And certainly for the proportion of our local SIDS deaths where co-sleeping was present, with the exception of one death, there was another one or more risk factors that you would expect for SIDS, be that prematurity, low birth weight, smoking, substance misuse, alcohol. So I think it's about, helping individual families recognise what are their risks, what can they do to mitigate them, for example, smoking cessation. The other thing was, the concentration was, as you'd expect, both from sort of national data, a particularly vulnerable period when they're under 6 months, but also recognising that safer sleep advice needs to be revisited over time, because as babies become mobile, different situations will present different risks to them, and that we've all reflected on the difficulties that COVID's represented about the other opportunities beyond the universal for different multi-agency professionals to have that contact with families around safer sleep. So all of us being resourceful about when we're in touch with families and confident to explore sleeping with them and what it looks like for their family, and signposting and giving advice effectively.
Thank you for that, Sarah. Did anybody else want to comment on this slide or anything else that they wanted to add? Kate.
Just that we, at every opportunity, I think we need to be talking about sleep, which then opens up that conversation about safe sleep and what to expect, the developmental changes throughout a baby's life, and how different situations arise, and how we can give them the right support at that time to meet their needs.
Thank you, Kate. Sarah Green?
Is when you go and do a home visit is to actually ask the parents where their babies are going to be sleeping, and ask to see that space, and then you can kind of start those conversations, and I think that's really important.
Thank you. And Stella?
And I think also in the context of safer sleep, we mustn't forget smoking, because second to putting babies down to sleep on their backs, smoking is, you know, the next big factor that could prevent more babies dying of SIDS. And so it's estimated that if no mum smoked during her pregnancy, that 1/3 of babies' lives would have been saved just from SIDS alone. So it's really important to ensure that parents, anybody caring for the baby, that mum doesn't smoke during her pregnancy, and preferably doesn't restart after she's had the baby, and then the baby is kept in a smoke-free environment after that baby is born, is, you know, goes along with that safer sleep advice.
Thank you, Stella. Any other comments that anybody wants to make? Okay, well, I'll thank you all for your time and all your contributions this afternoon.